Welcome, weary traveler, to another journey through the corridors of time. Tonight, we step into the shadowed halls of medieval castles, where flickering candlelight dances across stone walls in the aroma of exotic spices, mingles with the smoke of great hearth fires. Allow yourself to settle comfortably as we explore a world where food was far more than mere sustenance. It was a declaration of power, symbol of divine favor, and often a matter of life and death. In the medieval world, what you ate determined not just your health, but your place in the grand hierarchy of existence. Tonight, we'll walk alongside both the mighty and the meek, discovering what it truly meant to dine like a king, and what terrible price the common folk paid for their rulers' extravagance. Close your eyes and imagine yourself transported to an age where a single meal could cost more than a peasant family might see in their entire lifetime, where the very act of eating became theater diplomacy and social control, all woven into one elaborate tapestry. The medieval feast was never simply about food, it was about power made manifest. Wealth displayed with deliberate ostentation, and hierarchy reinforced with every carefully orchestrated bite. As we begin this journey together, let the worries of your modern world fade away, placed by the steady rhythm of history unfolding before you, like the slow turning of ancient pages. Picture yourself awakening before dawn in a single-room dwelling, its earthen floor cold beneath your bare feet. The air carries the acrid scent of smoke from poorly ventilated hearths, mingling with the ever-present odor of unwashed bodies and the mustiness of straw bedding that has not been changed in weeks. This is your reality as a medieval peasant, and today, like so many others, you will work from sunrise to sunset, while knowing that just beyond the hill, your Lord prepares for another magnificent feast. The morning begins, as always, with a meager breakfast, if you can call it that. Perhaps a thin gruel of oats or barley, boiled in water that you hope is clean, though you've long since stopped trusting such hopes. The wooden bowl in your hands is cracked and stained, a family heirloom not by choice but by necessity. Your children gather around the single pot, their faces gaunt with the perpetual hunger that has become as familiar as breathing. You measure out each spoonful carefully, knowing that this watery mixture must sustain your family until the evening meal. There is one. Outside, the morning air carries something different today. The usual smells of the village animal waste, rotting thatch, and human sweater, overpowered by something else entirely, roasting meat. The rich, fatty aroma of cooking flesh drifts down from the castle on the hill like a cruel reminder of all that you cannot have. Today is a feast day, and Lord Edmund has invited neighboring nobles to demonstrate his wealth and generosity. The irony is not lost on you that this generosity extends only to those who already have more than enough. Your stomach growls audibly as you make your way to the fields, joining the long line of bent backs and calloused hands that represent your village's daily tribute to survival. The work is back-breaking, harvesting grain that you will never taste, tending livestock that will never grace your table, cultivating vegetables that will disappear into the castle kitchens like offerings to distant gods. As the day progresses, the sounds of preparation from the castle grow louder. You can hear the shouting of servants, the clatter of pots and pans, the lowing of cattle being driven to slaughter. A procession of carts passes by your field, loaded with goods that seem to belong to another world entirely. Casks of wine that represent more wealth than your family will see in a generation. Exotic spices in quantities that could feed your village for months. Wheels of cheese so large that grown men struggle to lift them. The most torturous part is watching the hunting parties return. Lord Edmund's guests have spent their morning in sport, chasing deer and wild boar through forests where you are forbidden to set foot. The penalty for poaching is severe the loss of a hand. Worse yet, you watch those magnificent animals being carried past your hungry family, and the temptation gnaws at you like a physical pain. By midday, your own meager provisions are exhausted. The thin soup that served as breakfast is a distant memory, and your stomach has begun the familiar process of eating itself that marks the middle hours of every working day. You've learned to ignore the dizziness, the way your hands shake slightly when you grip your tools, the fog that settles over your thoughts when your body begins consuming its own muscle for energy. The children fare worse. Their growing bodies demand sustenance that simply doesn't exist, and you watch them grow thinner with each passing season. Little Mary, your youngest, has developed the bloated belly that signals severe malnutrition, though you dare not speak this truth aloud. Her eyes have taken on the dull, listless expression you recognize in too many village children, the look of those whose bodies are slowly shutting down from lack of proper nourishment. From your position in the fields, you can see the castle courtyard where servants scurry about like ants. The feast will begin at sunset, and preparations have been ongoing for days. You know that tonight, perhaps 50 nobles will consume more food than your entire village sees in a month. They will eat for pleasure, for politics, for display, while you and your neighbors eat only when you can, and then only enough to keep working. The afternoon brings its own special torments. Kitchen scraps are sometimes discarded near the castle walls, and despite the danger of punishment, desperate villagers have been known to risk everything for moldy bread or bones with scraps of meat still clinging to them. You've never stooped to such degradation yourself, but you understand those who do. Hunger has a way of stripping away dignity, leaving only the animal imperative to survive. As evening approaches, your day's labor finally ends. You return to your hovel exhausted, your back aching from hours, bent over crops that will never nourish your family. The evening meal awaits, if you can call it that. Perhaps a piece of dark bread, hard as stone, and mixed with sawdust to make the grain last longer. Maybe a thin soup made from whatever vegetables you've managed to grow in your small plot, though the best of these have already been claimed as part of your feudal obligations. The contrast is unavoidable. As you sit with your family around your single candle, rationing out the few mouthfuls that constitute dinner, the sounds of revelry drift down from the castle. Laughter, music, the clink of goblets raised in toast after toast. You know that at this very moment, nobles are literally throwing food away to sing bones to their hunting dogs, leaving entire roasted birds untouched because they've grown bored with the flavor. This is perhaps the cruelest irony of feudal life. The very people who produce the food are those least likely to benefit from it. Your hands planted the grain that becomes their bread. Your labor raised the animals that grace their tables. Your sweat and blood have enriched the soil that yields their abundance. Yet you remain forever on the outside, watching through metaphorical windows as others feast on the fruits of your toil. The children go to bed hungry again tonight, their small bodies curled together for warmth on straw mattresses that provide little comfort. You listen to their breathing, noting how shallow it's become, how their sleep is restless and troubled. Malnutrition affects everything: their ability to fight off disease, their capacity to grow and develop normally, their chances of surviving to adulthood. In this harsh equation of medieval life, your children are merely statistics in a system that values them only for their future labor potential. As you finally allow yourself to rest, the sounds of the feast continue well into the night. Tomorrow will bring another day, much like this one. The eternal cycle of labor and want that defines peasant existence will continue, punctuated occasionally by feast days that serve only to highlight the vast chasm between your world and theirs. In the grand theater of feudal society, peasants like you are not the audience, but the stage itself, supporting a performance in which you will never be invited to participate. Imagine yourself as Master Guillaume de Montpellier, standing in the pre-dawn darkness of the royal kitchens at Chateau de Vincennes. The year is 1347, and you bear the weighty title of chief cook to His Most Christian Majesty, King Philip VI of France, your hands scarred from countless burns and cuts accumulated over 2 decades of service. Move with practiced precision as you begin preparations for what may be the most important feast of your career. Today, you must feed not only the French court, but also visiting dignitaries from England. Despite the ongoing tensions that will soon erupt into what history will remember as the 100 Years' War, you rise each morning while the castle still sleeps. Your internal rhythm attuned to the demands of a kitchen that never truly rests. The stone floors beneath your feet are perpetually damp with spilled liquids and the condensation that forms when hot cooking meets cold castle walls. Your first task is always the same: inspecting the stores, checking for spoilage, calculating quantities, and making the 1,000 small decisions that will determine whether today's meals bring glory or disaster to your reputation. Your journey to this position began 30 years ago when you were barely 10 years old and your father, a minor craftsman in Lyon, ventured you to the household of a local nobleman. Those early years were brutal, endless days spent turning spits over roaring fires. Your small hands blistered and burned, your body constantly aching from labor that seemed designed to break rather than build. You learned to sleep standing up, to eat scraps without complaint, and to anticipate the needs of your superiors before they voiced them. The kitchen hierarchy was as rigid and unforgiving as any military structure. At the bottom, children like yourself performed the most menial tasks: hauling water, cleaning pots, feeding fires, and enduring regular beatings for infractions both real and imagined. Above you were the kitchen boys, slightly older and infinitely more privileged in their ability to handle actual food preparation. Then came the undercooks, the specialized craftsmen who focused on particular aspects of cooking: the saucier, the ratisser, the pâtissiers jealously guarding their secrets and viewing newcomers as potential threats. Your rise through these ranks was neither swift nor certain. Medieval kitchens operated on a system of apprenticeship that could stretch for decades, and many aspiring cooks never progressed beyond the most basic tasks. What set you apart was not merely skill, though you possessed that in abundance, but rather an almost supernatural ability to remember flavors, to understand how different ingredients would interact. You had been observing, learning, memorizing every technique and recipe, and when your moment arrived, you were ready. The feast was a triumph, and more importantly, it was noticed by influential guests who carried word of your abilities to other noble houses. Your reputation grew slowly but steadily. Medieval cooking was not merely about preparing food, it was about theater, diplomacy, and the careful navigation of social hierarchies. A successful cook needed to understand not just culinary techniques, but also the complex web of relationships within the court. The dietary restrictions imposed by religious observance, the seasonal availability of ingredients, and the ever-present threat of food poisoning in an age when preservation methods were primitive and unreliable. The transition to royal service brought responsibilities that would have seemed impossible in your youth. You now command a kitchen staff of nearly 50 people, each with specialized roles and jealously guarded territories. There are the spice masters, who control access to the exotic seasonings that can cost more per ounce than gold. The wine stewards, responsible for the vast cellars that represent fortunes in imported vintages. The bakers, who work through the night to ensure fresh bread for every meal. The pastry cooks, whose elaborate confections serve as both dessert and political statement. Managing these personalities requires diplomatic skills that rival those of court officials. Master Henry, your chief saucier, has served the royal family for 30 years and brooks no interference with his methods. Despite the fact that his techniques have grown stale and predictable, young Robert recently arrived from training in Italy, burns with innovative ideas, but lacks the patience to understand court traditions. Marie, the only woman permitted in your kitchen due to her unparalleled skill with delicate pastries, faces constant challenges to her authority from male subordinates, who resent taking orders from someone they consider naturally inferior. Your typical day begins at 3 in the morning when you review the requirements for all meals that will be served. Breakfast for the royal family and their immediate retinue. The midday meal for the full court, which can number in the hundreds depending on who is in residence. The evening feast, often the most elaborate affair, designed to impress visitors and demonstrate the king's magnificence. Each meal requires different preparations, different ingredients, different levels of ceremony. The pressure is constant and unrelenting. A single failure, spoiled meat, oversalted soup, insufficient quantities of any dish can result in immediate dismissal and the permanent destruction of your reputation. Medieval nobles are unforgiving of culinary failures, viewing them as personal insults and signs of disrespect. The spice merchants, whose goods arrive after months-long journeys from distant lands. Their precious cargoes carefully guarded and astronomically expensive. The farmers who provide the endless quantities of grain, vegetables, and livestock that feed the court's voracious appetite. Each supplier knows that royal patronage can make their fortune, but also that your disapproval can destroy their business overnight. You taste everything personally, your palate trained to detect the slightest hint of spoilage or adulteration. Your reputation depends not just on what you create, but on your ability to ensure that every ingredient meets the impossibly high standards expected at a royal table. The art of medieval cooking extends far beyond simple preparation. You are expected to create dishes that tell stories, that demonstrate the king's power and sophistication, that incorporate symbolic elements meaningful to particular guests or occasions. Feast celebrating a military victory requires different considerations than a diplomatic dinner designed to flatter foreign ambassadors. Wedding banquets demand traditional dishes that invoke fertility and prosperity, while funeral meals must balance mourning with the celebration of the deceased's achievements. Your knowledge encompasses not just cooking techniques, but also the elaborate rules of precedence that govern how food is served. Which dishes are presented first? Who receives the choicest portions? How different ranks are acknowledged through the distribution of delicacies? All of this falls under your responsibility. A mistake in protocol can create diplomatic incidents that echo far beyond the dining hall. The physical demands of your position have aged you prematurely. Your hands bear the permanent scars of countless burns and cuts. Your back aches constantly from years of bending over preparation tables and lifting heavy pots. The heat from the great hearths has given your face a permanently ruddy complexion, and the smoke has left you with a persistent cough that worsens each winter. Yet there are moments of pure triumph that make all the suffering worthwhile. When a particularly difficult dish emerges perfectly from the ovens, when foreign dignitaries praise the meal in terms that reflect honor upon your king, when you successfully navigate the complex logistics of feeding hundreds of people, while maintaining the precise standards expected of royal cuisine, your legacy extends beyond the meals you create. You are training the next generation of royal cooks, passing down techniques and secrets that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. Your recipes, carefully guarded and transmitted only to trusted pupils, will influence French cuisine for generations to come. In a world where most knowledge dies with its possessor, you are creating something that will outlast your own brief existence. As you stand in your kitchen this morning, preparing for another day of controlled chaos, you carry with you the weight of tradition, the pressure of expectation, and the quiet pride of a craftsman who has achieved the highest levels of his art. Your name may never appear in the histories that record the deeds of kings and nobles, but your skills help create the very atmosphere of power and magnificence that defines the medieval court. The sun rises, and your day truly begins. Step with me now into the Great Hall of Warwick Castle on a crisp October evening in 1389. The massive stone chamber stretches before you, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that flicker and dance in the light of hundreds of beeswax candles. Tonight is the feast of St. Crispin. Earl Thomas has spared no expense in demonstrating his magnificence to the assembled nobles, merchants, and clergy who have traveled from across England to witness this display of culinary artistry. The hall itself has been transformed into a theater of consumption. Long trestle tables stretch the length of the room, their surfaces covered with pristine white linen that represents weeks of careful preparation by the castle's laundresses. Each table setting represents a small fortune silver plate for the highest-ranking guests, pewter for the moderately important, and simple wooden trenchers for those whose status merits inclusion but not luxury. As you take your assigned place according to the rigid hierarchy that governs all medieval social interaction, servants begin the elaborate dance of service that will continue for the next 5 hours. The first course arrives with ceremonial fanfare, a procession of dishes so abundant and varied that even the most jaded courtier cannot help but marvel at the display. At the head table, where Earl Thomas presides with his honored guests, the centerpiece is a massive roasted peacock. its feathers carefully preserved and reattached after cooking to create the illusion that the magnificent bird has simply settled upon the table in all its living glory. The peacock's preparation required 3 days of work. First, the careful skinning to preserve the plumage. Then the elaborate stuffing with forcemeat mixed with expensive spices. And finally, the delicate process of reconstruction that transforms cooked meat back into a semblance of life. This is no mere meal, but rather edible sculpture designed to inspire awe and demonstrate the host's ability to command nature itself. The peacock's beak has been gilded with real gold leaf, and its tail feathers spread in a fan that spans nearly 3 feet across the table. When carved, the meat will reveal layers of different colored stuffings, white from ground chicken, green from herbs, yellow from saffron, creating a visual feast that mirrors the bird's natural magnificence. Surrounding this central marvel are dishes that represent the farthest reaches of the known world. A haunch of venison from the Earl's private hunting grounds, its surface glazed with honey and studded with whole cloves that arrived via the spice routes from distant Ceylon. The meat is so tender it falls apart at the touch of a knife. Having been aged in the Castle's special larder for precisely 21 days to achieve the perfect balance between decay and preservation that medieval palates prized, the fish course presents its own wonders. Despite the fact that Warwick Castle sits far from any sea, through the miracle of medieval logistics, a complex network of fast riders and carefully planned routes, fresh salmon from Scottish waters graces the table alongside lampreys from the Severn River. The salmon has been prepared in the fashionable new style recently imported from France, poached in wine and herbs, then glazed with a sauce made from its own bones and skin, creating a dish that appears to have been carved from precious amber. But it is the lamprey pie that represents the true pinnacle of medieval culinary ambition. These serpentine creatures, prized for their rich, almost meaty flavor, have been arranged in intricate patterns within pastry coffins that required master bakers to work through the night. The pie's crust bears the Earl's coat of arms, molded in pastry and painted with egg yolk to create a golden representation of his heraldic symbols. Breaking into this edible artwork reveals the lampreys arranged in perfect spirals, their flesh infused with wine and spices that mask the slightly muddy flavor that comes from their riverine habitat. The vegetable dishes, while less dramatic than the meat courses, represent their own form of medieval luxury. Root vegetables that have been turned and shaped into perfect geometric forms, then glazed with honey and butter until they gleam like jewels. Peas that have been laboriously shelled by hand and cooked with mint and cream, creating a vivid green puree that provides visual contrast to the browns and golds of the meat dishes. Perhaps most impressive are the sugar sculptures that serve as both decoration and dessert. Medieval confectioners possessed skills that would not be out of place in modern pastry kitchens, creating elaborate castles, ships, and mythical beasts entirely from sugar, marzipan, and other precious sweet ingredients. These sculptures are edible, but their primary purpose is visual. They represent the host's ability to literally transform wealth into temporary beauty, to create art that will be consumed and destroyed in the course of a single evening. The bread served at such feasts bears no resemblance to the course, dark loaves that sustain common folk. This is manchet bread, made from flour so fine it has been sifted multiple times through silk cloth. The resulting loaves are white as snow, soft as clouds, and flavored with exotic ingredients like anise and coriander. Each loaf represents more grain than a peasant family might see in a week, transformed through countless hours of labor into an edible symbol of refinement. Wine flows like water, but not ordinary wine. The Earl's cellars contain vintages from across Europe, deep red wines from Gascony, golden sweet wines from Greece, and the prized Hippocros, the spiced wine mixture that requires ingredients worth more than many nobles' annual incomes. Each cup served represents a small fortune, and the casual way in which guests drain and refill their goblets demonstrates their host's magnificent indifference to expense. The spice usage alone at such a feast would bankrupt lesser nobles. Pepper, which costs more per pound than silver, is used with lavish abandon. Saffron, literally worth its weight in gold, colors rice, dishes, and sauces with its distinctive yellow hue. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg from the distant Indies are ground fresh for each dish, their aromatic presence announcing the host's connections to international trade networks that span continents. As the evening progresses, the dishes become increasingly elaborate and symbolic. A roasted swan appears, its neck curved in elegant death, surrounded by cygnets that have been stuffed with a mixture of their own meat and exotic fruits. The symbolism is deliberate. One's mate for life and represent fidelity, making them appropriate for a feast celebrating the Earl's recent marriage alliance with a neighboring family. The subtlety course brings dishes designed more for wonder than sustenance. Castle made entirely of pastry and filled with live birds that burst forth when the structure is broken open, creating a moment of chaos and delight that guests will remember for years. A mechanical automaton powered by clockwork that moves across the table, dispensing wine from hidden compartments, representing the cutting edge of medieval technology applied to entertainment. Between courses, entertainers provide diversions, while the kitchen staff prepares the next wave of culinary marvels. Minstrels sing songs that celebrate the host's generosity and the guest's nobility. Acrobats perform feats that mirror the kitchen's own impossible achievements. The feast becomes a multimedia experience where food, music, and spectacle combine to create memories that will enhance the host's reputation for months to come. The waste generated by such events is staggering by any standard. Entire animals are served for the sake of appearance, with only small portions actually consumed. Trenchers soaked with rich sauces are discarded after a single use. Wine is spilled carelessly. Valuable spices are scattered across tablecloths, and expensive ingredients are casually destroyed in the service of creating temporary beauty. Yet this waste is not accidental but intentional. A deliberate demonstration of wealth so vast that its destruction becomes a form of power in itself. Medieval nobles understood that true luxury lay not in having expensive things, but in being able to afford their casual destruction. The feast becomes a form of economic warfare, designed to awe competitors and potential rivals into submission through sheer overwhelming display. As the evening draws toward its close, the final course brings sweet wines and delicate confections designed to aid digestion after hours of heavy eating. Comfits made from sugar and spices, wafers thin as parchment and flavored with rosewater, and elaborate marzipan sculptures that represent the pinnacle of the confectioner's art. The guests depart in the early hours of morning, their clothes perfumed with the smoke of exotic woods burned in the hall's great fireplace their minds. Reeling from an experience that has assaulted every sense with the most refined pleasures medieval civilization could provide, They carry with them not just the memory of exceptional food, but the knowledge that they have witnessed power made manifest through the medium of cuisine. This is the true art of medieval feasting, the transformation of mere sustenance into theater, diplomacy, and social control, all accomplished through the careful orchestration of ingredients. Techniques and presentation that represent the highest achievements of their age. The church bells of St. Denis, Abbey ring vespers as we observe two simultaneous scenes unfolding on this autumn evening. In 1372, in the Grand Hall of the Royal Palace, King Charles V of France presides over a magnificent feast celebrating the betrothal of his daughter to the Duke of Bavaria. Simultaneously, just 3 miles away in the village of Cannes, a baker named Piers sits with his family around their single wooden table, sharing what they consider their evening meal. The contrast between these two dining experiences reveals the vast chasm that separates medieval society into worlds so different they might as well exist in separate realms entirely. In the royal hall, the evening's entertainment has reached its crescendo. The king, resplendent in robes of silk and ermine, raises a goblet of Malvoisie wine that costs more than most families earn in a year. Before him stretches a table laden with dishes that represent the culmination of medieval culinary art: roasted swans stuffed with herbs from the royal gardens, lamprey pie seasoned with spices from the Indies and subtleties of sugar and marzipan, crafted to resemble miniature castles and mythical beasts. The king's portion, alone served on plates of gold and silver, contains enough food to feed a dozen common families, yet much of it will remain untouched. Destined for the kitchens where servants will fight over scraps or simply discard it as waste. This casual abundance serves a purpose beyond mere sustenance. It demonstrates the divine favor that supposedly justifies royal authority. The God-given right to command the resources of an entire kingdom. Meanwhile, in Pierre's humble dwelling, the family gathers around a meal that represents the successful conclusion of another day's survival. The baker's position grants him privileges unavailable to common peasants. He works indoors, handles valuable grain, and possesses skills that ensure steady employment. Yet even his relatively elevated status provides only the most basic comforts when compared to the royal table. Pierre's evening meal centers around a single loaf of bread, but not the fine white manchet served at royal tables. This is pain bis, made from a mixture of wheat and barley, stark color and coarse texture marking it as food for working people. The family shares this loaf carefully, each person receiving a portion calculated to provide necessary sustenance without waste. Even the crumbs are precious, gathered and saved for tomorrow's pottage. Accompanying the bread is a bowl of cabbage soup, its thin broth providing warmth and the illusion of abundance. Pierre's wife Marie has stretched a single marrow bone throughout the week, boiling it repeatedly to extract every fragment of nutrition, adding whatever vegetables their small garden plot could provide. Onions, leeks, and root vegetables create a mixture that fills the belly, even if it doesn't truly satisfy hunger. Pierre's family eats from wooden bowls, carved by the baker himself during winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible. Their spoons are simple affairs, worn smooth by years of use, and their single cup passes from person to person as they share whatever weak ale their meager budget can afford. There is no ceremony here, no elaborate ritual, only the practical business of consuming enough food to continue working tomorrow. The royal feast incorporates ingredients from across the known world: pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, sugar from Cyprus, and wines from every corner of Europe grace the royal table. These exotic elements arrive through trade networks that span continents, their astronomical cost justified by the pleasure and prestige they bring to noble palates. Single dish might contain spices worth more than a craftsman's annual income. Pierre's meal draws entirely from local sources, often from within a few miles of his dwelling. The grain he mills comes from nearby fields, the vegetables from his family's garden plot, the occasional piece of meat from animals raised in the village. His family's diet changes with the seasons, not by choice, but by necessity. They eat what the immediate environment provides when it provides it. The preparation methods reveal another layer of contrast. Royal kitchens employ dozens of specialists, each master of particular techniques and jealous guardians of culinary secrets. The king's food undergoes elaborate transformations: roasting, braising, baking, smoking, and candying create flavors and textures that push medieval cooking to its absolute limits. Sauces require hours of reduction and careful seasoning, while pastries demand skills that take decades to master. Marie prepares her family's meal with techniques passed down through generations of necessity. The soup pot rarely empties completely each day, brings new additions that stretch the contents further. Vegetables are prepared simply, often boiled in the same pot to conserve fuel and extract maximum nutrition. Bread baking requires careful calculation of ingredients and fuel costs, with no room for experimentation or waste. Time itself is experienced differently at these two tables. The royal feast extends for hours, the courses arriving at leisurely intervals designed to maximize pleasure and social interaction. Guests have the luxury of contemplating each dish, discussing its merits, and savoring complex flavors that develop slowly on the palate. Entertainment fills the gaps between courses. Musicians, poets, and performers ensure that no moment lacks stimulation. Pierre's family eats quickly and efficiently. The workday begins before dawn and extends past sunset, leaving little time for the luxury of slow consumption. They eat standing or sitting briefly before returning to tasks that cannot wait. Their elaborate meals, while demonstrating wealth and power, often undermined the very health they were meant to sustain. Pierre's family faces the opposite challenge: chronic undernourishment that leaves them vulnerable to disease and exhaustion. Their simple diet provides basic sustenance, but often lacks the variety necessary for optimal health. These elaborate meals are investments in social capital, designed to generate political returns that justify their enormous costs. Pierre's simple meal, by contrast, represents the foundation upon which all medieval civilization rests. His labor as a baker provides the basic sustenance that enables society to function. His family's careful consumption ensures that resources are used efficiently, rather than wasted on display. Their humble dinner represents the practical reality that underlies all the elaborate ceremony of noble life. The psychological impact of these contrasting dining experiences shapes the worldview of each class. Royal children grow up expecting abundance, viewing elaborate meals as their natural right and simple food as beneath their station. This expectation of luxury creates individuals who understand power through the lens of consumption, who measure their worth by their ability to command resources regardless of cost. Pierre's children learn different lessons from their family's evening meal. They understand the value of every crumb, the importance of careful planning, and the satisfaction that comes from honest labor rewarded with simple sustenance. Their relationship with food is fundamentally practical rather than ceremonial, grounded in the reality of scarcity rather than the fantasy of unlimited abundance. As both meals conclude on this medieval evening, the participants carry forward the lessons embedded in their dining experiences. The royal court disperses to chambers, warmed by great fires, their stomachs full to bursting with delicacies from across Europe. In the morning, these two worlds will continue their parallel existence, each dependent on the other, yet separated by gaps that seem as vast as oceans. The king will wake to another day of ceremony and abundance, while Pierre will rise before dawn to begin again the patient work of transforming grain into bread. This eternal contrast between feast and famine, luxury and necessity, ceremony and practicality, defines the medieval world and shapes the destinies of all who live within its rigid hierarchies. As our journey through the medieval world of food and feasting draws to its gentle close, allow yourself to settle more deeply into the comfort of your modern surroundings. The flickering candles of those ancient halls have dimmed to darkness. The sounds of revelry and struggle alike have faded into the silence of centuries past, and we return to a world where the simple act of opening a refrigerator grants us access to abundance that would have seemed miraculous to both king and peasant alike. Consider for a moment the extraordinary privilege of your daily meals. The morning coffee that awakens your senses travels to you from distant mountains, yet arrives at a cost that represents mere minutes of modern labor. The bread on your table, whether simple or elaborate, emerges from ovens heated at the touch of a button. Its ingredients measured not in precious handfuls but in quantities that reflect casual abundance. Even the most modest contemporary meal surpasses the elaborate feasts of medieval nobility in its variety, safety, and nutritional completeness. The medieval world we have explored together reveals itself as a place of stark contrasts and rigid hierarchies, where food served not merely as sustenance, but as a complex language of power, status, and survival. From the desperate hunger of peasants watching their lord's abundance from afar, to the careful artistry of Master Gidgem laboring over dishes that would make or break, reputations, to the elaborate theater of royal banquets, where entire kingdoms, resources were transformed into temporary spectacle. Element speaks to a civilization where scarcity shaped every aspect of human existence. Yet within these harsh realities, we have glimpsed moments of genuine human triumph. The skill of craftsmen who elevated simple ingredients into works of art. The resilience of families who found dignity and sustenance in the humblest meals. The innovation of cooks who pushed medieval cuisine to heights that still inspire admiration centuries later. These achievements remind us that human creativity and perseverance can flourish even under the most challenging circumstances. The great medieval feasts, for all their extravagance and waste, represented more than mere gluttony or display. They embodied humanity's eternal desire to transform the mundane act of eating into something transcendent to create beauty, foster community, and celebrate the abundance that makes civilization possible. In their own imperfect way, these elaborate ceremonies acknowledge food as one of life's fundamental pleasures and essential bonds between people. Even the simpler meals of common folk carried their own profound significance. Peers' family, sharing bread and soup around their wooden table, participated in rituals as ancient as humanity itself, the gathering at day's end, the grateful consumption of earned sustenance, the quiet satisfaction of survival achieved through honest labor. These modest dinners, repeated in countless homes across medieval Europe, represented the foundation upon which all higher achievements rested. As you prepare for your own rest tonight, perhaps you might pause to appreciate the miraculous normalcy of your evening meal. The electric lights that banish darkness at your command. The clean water that flows without effort from taps connected to treatment systems that would seem like magic to medieval minds. The variety of foods available regardless of season, preserved and transported through technologies that compress time and distance into mere convenience. Your kitchen, however modest, contains capabilities that would have amazed the most sophisticated medieval cook. Temperature control precise to the degree. Refrigeration that stops time itself, preserving food in states of freshness that were once achievable only through enormous effort and expense. Spices and ingredients from every corner of the globe, available at costs that represent tiny fractions of your daily earnings. The safety of your food, too, reflects achievements that medieval diners could scarcely imagine. Each meal comes to you protected by systems of inspection, regulation, and scientific understanding that have virtually eliminated the constant threat of poisoning that haunted even royal tables. You eat without fear, taking for granted a security that countless generations died wishing they could achieve. But perhaps most remarkably, you possess something that was available to neither king nor commoner in the medieval world, the freedom to choose what you will eat. You will eat it, and how you will prepare it. Your meals reflect personal preference rather than rigid social hierarchy, individual taste rather than ceremonial obligation, nutritional knowledge rather than superstition and tradition. As sleep begins to claim you, let these historical echoes fade into peaceful memory. The struggles of medieval peasants and the elaborate ceremonies of their lords belong to a past that shaped our present but no longer constrains our choices. Their world of scarcity and hierarchy, of rigid custom and desperate improvisation, given way to possibilities they could never have imagined. Rest now in the knowledge that tomorrow you will wake to abundance that spans the globe. Two choices that honor both tradition and innovation. 2 meals that nourish not just your body, but your freedom to live as you choose. The medieval world sleeps in history's embrace, its lessons preserved, but its limitations transcended, leaving you free to dream of flavors yet untasted and gatherings yet to be shared. Sweet dreams, gentle traveler. May your rest be peaceful, and your morning meal a quiet celebration of how far humanity has journeyed from those distant halls, where candlelight once danced across tables laden with both magnificent abundance and the shadows of want that made such abundance precious beyond our modern comprehension. The bells of St. Denis have long since fallen silent, but the warmth of human gathering around shared food continues in your own time, in your own way, carrying forward the eternal hope that tomorrow's bread will taste even sweeter than today's. Sleep well,